Hi from me, Jared Epstein, and welcome to another episode of Simcha, a celebration of life. This week, New York-based Yael Kanarek tells us about her work and art as a jeweler, which is informed by her Jewish identity. Cheryl Unterslak shares insights into a bit of Durban synagogue history, and to start us off, Tracy Milner from Joburg teaches us how to make a uniquely Russian Jewish dish.
Today we are doing a very interesting dish which is Russian in origin. It's a herring salad and it is called shuba. The translation of shuba is herring under the fur coat, which is probably from the way that it looks. But let's jump right into making this interesting salad. We need a packet of salted herring fillets, about a 350 gram packet, a large onion, 3 potatoes, 3 large beetroot, 3 carrots and 4 eggs, which we will boil. All of the ingredients do get cooked first, and very interestingly, we cook them with their skins on. To start with, we're going to need to boil the beetroots and the carrots and the potatoes. So, beetroots go into a pot with the skin on. Everything gets boiled with the skin on because they take the longest to boil. They take about 2 hours at least. Really give them time to cook properly. We need to boil our carrots and the potatoes. And the carrots and potatoes can be boiled together. And we leave them to cool before we peel. It's actually an interesting way of doing it. They peel beautifully and the skins are actually usable. And I've got a feeling that that's why it was done that way traditionally, because Jewish food traditionally, we needed to use up everything that was available to us. Food was hard to come by. We were often in ghettos and shtetls, and we didn't have access to many foods. Let's cover them so they'll cook a little bit quicker, and let's get them to the stove. An interesting fact about the salad is there's a legend behind it that it was created by a tavern owner by the name of Andras Bogomilov in 1918. It was on New Year's Eve, and to prevent drunken fights breaking out in his tavern, his cook developed this dish to line the stomachs, and it did actually work apparently to prevent all these breakages that he was finding that he had in his taverns. Right, so let's get started, and we can cut up our onion while our vegetables are boiling. So we want the onion in very, very small pieces, small as you can make it. You can use a food processor to chop it up if that's easier. And a nice tip with the onions is just to put some boiling water over your sliced up onions. Cover them with boiling water and leave them for 3 minutes or so to stand, and then strain them well. And that takes some of the tartness out of the onion taste, some of that bite out of them. While we're draining the onions, let's start peeling our vegetables. Although the legend states that the dish was developed in 1918, it gained popularity and became known as a Jewish dish around the 1960s. Another interesting fact is that wherever the Jews have been in the world, traditionally and unfortunately, we have been ostracized, we have been put into ghettos and into little towns and shtetls. Shtetl is a little town. And as a result of not being able to own land or own crops, the Jews had to rely on vegetables and fruits that actually kept very well. And traditionally the root vegetables kept very well without going moldy and going bad very quickly. So you'll find a lot of Jewish dishes comprise a lot, especially of Jews that come from Russia and Germany, comprise a lot of those root vegetables, which made up a lot of our diet, unfortunately. Right, we've tidied up, so let's get started with grating all our vegetables. An interesting fact about the beetroot in the salad is that it became representative of the red in the revolutionary flag, or the flag of the revolution. I think most of the foods actually did become very symbolic of the struggles in the USSR. It has become a traditionally Jewish dish, and the Jews did struggle a lot in the USSR, as in many other countries. The salad can be either made into a nice glass bowl that you can see all the layers of the salad showing through, which I'm going to do today. You could also make it directly into a springform tin. The salad does need to stand for at least 3 hours in the fridge before you use it, preferably overnight. Right, so let's start with our onions. That's our first layer. Of course, you can change these layers around a little bit if you choose to. So we're going to cut the herring into small pieces. Herring is one of those things that you either love or hate. I don't think there's anyone who's kind of got no feeling either way about it. And now we can add the potato. You can flatten each layer as you go along so that it fits nicely in the dish and compacts marginally. Right. So there's our nice fur coat of potato. Now we add a few spoons of mayonnaise. Just spread it nicely. Right, our next layer is the carrots. And another layer of mayonnaise. Don't want too much mayonnaise, you don't want to overpower the dish. It's just to give it a little bit of moisture, that it's not a totally dry salad. We'll grate the egg straight onto the salad. And again, a little bit of mayonnaise. And finally, the beetroot layer. And now we add our final layer of mayonnaise. And there we have our shuba, our herring in a fur coat.
Yael Kanarak is a New York City-based jeweler. Her work and art are inspired by both the city and her Jewish journey. We chatted to Yael to find out more.
I was born in New York City, and when I was 3 years old, we moved to Israel. And I grew up there until I was 24, and I came back to New York. And I've been living in New York ever since. I would say I grew up secular, though my grandfather was religious. So I got to taste some of the religion through him, going to shul with him. I had a moment as a kid that I felt religious inclinations, and I would go with the neighbors to shul, and I was very excited when we started studying Torah in public school. And then I was very disappointed too. And most of the disappointment was turned against Eve. The story of the Garden of Eden, and reading how Eve failed and was tempted, and how weak she was. That's how I interpreted it. So now I was turned against Eve. It's really a terrible thing. What can I say? It's a terrible thing. And then that's the age where we start to form our social structures and understanding, develop a social awareness. And so this was what I was introduced to. And so I got more and more involved with contemporary art, and I saw that as my main focus and my main interest. And I came back to New York and I practiced internet art. I was very involved with the first generation of internet art and the emergence of the internet culturally, commercially. Very, very exciting times. And then I started exploring the internet from a multilingual perspective. I created the third chapter of my online trilogy called World of Awe in Hebrew, English, and Arabic. I wanted to understand how I can take this narrative that I developed called the Traveler's Journal into multiple language spaces, and that started a very long and ongoing exploration and vast exploration of the multilingual space and how they speak with each other and how they influence each other. And I did a series of works that are wall pieces, casting words, cutting words out of rubber, and then I thought it would be interesting to build it on the body and take it back to the wall. I still wasn't thinking quite jewelry, so I went to the jewelry industry shops where you can buy chains and clasps to buy silver chains and clasps so I can then build it on the body and bring it back to the wall. And I saw that they had punched letters in gold punched letters. And I said to myself, wow, I can write something with this. So I picked one of the lines from the narrative, the World of Awe narrative, the Traveler's Journal. I picked up a line and I created the first necklace. But it was very thin and was not a viable object in the sense that it was strong enough or well done enough. It was kind of a concept. And it took another 8 years to find the people who can help me produce it on the level that turns it into a really beautiful, viable object. And I needed to wait for the technology to get there, because the way we work is I design it in 3D. So I taught myself how to design in 3D, and then it's printed in high-end 3D printer, and then it's cast. So it starts in high technologies, and then it ends up being finished in traditional goldsmith techniques. And what I wanted to explore there is the kind of intimacy. So it's all, language is all about relationship. Whether it's a relationship with ourselves because we talk to ourselves most of the time, most of the conversations we have are with ourselves, or it's a relationship within a group of people that usually know each other, family members, spouses, parents, children. So now the jewelry is part of that conversation, and it allowed me an entry point into that. While the fine artworks that hang on the wall, some of them are very large, they're more of a kind of collective experience. A group of people might look at them at the same time. It's not as intimate. So it's really interesting, because once I taught myself how to build and how to work in 3D, going from a piece of jewelry that is very small in millimeters to a large-scale sculpture like I did for the US Embassy in Zimbabwe, I used the same software technology, but the outcome is massively different. So what I did in Zimbabwe is I used the same font that I used for the English jewelry, and I created a sculpture that brings together 18 languages spoken in Zimbabwe. Some of them are already dying languages, so the sculpture is also a preservation project. I was brought to Zimbabwe for a research trip to meet anthropologists and linguists from around the country to identify those languages and also understand a little more about what the words that I chose for the sculptures, which are day and night, how they are understood within the culture. And it was absolutely a fascinating experience. So that contrast between the intimacy of the jewelry and the collective experience, like in the sculpture in Zimbabwe, is super fascinating to me. It's really, it's absolutely exciting to be able to work with language in this particular way. I really like those personal moments. I like those intimate conversations that emerge where I know that I'm making something that would be very dear to someone. And when you work in gold, pieces become heirloom. they have the potential to move down, to be carried down the generations. And that is so interesting. I wasn't aware of that, but when I started working in jewelry, I started looking a little bit into the history of jewelry. Jewelry is one of the most ancient forms of craft since historical times. So there's such a long tradition. And when you look at the Egyptian jewelry, it's extraordinary what they were able to do. Absolutely extraordinary, the craftsmanship. And that's thousands of years old. So it was really interesting to follow that, get an understanding for this kind of intimacy, appreciate how strongly people feel about the jewelry, and be able to contribute and be part of it.
Passionate community member Cheryl Unterslak loves Durban Jewish history. Today, she shares that love with us by telling us all about the history behind important Jewish synagogues in Durban.
Well, I'm a part of the Durban Jewish community, and I just love history, and I love architecture, and I've just always had an incredible interest in the Jewish history of Durban. So, first building they bought was a tiny little decommissioned church that was in Grey Street, which is now Dr. Yusuf Dada Road. And they were in there for a short while. It was a little building because there were very few Jews. But then what happened was the Boer War. And with the Boer War, you had this huge influx of Jews coming from, then called the Transvaal, coming into Durban. And they most definitely didn't fit into that tiny little building. So they knew that they had to build another shul to accommodate them. And then they built the most magnificent, really beautiful shul in St. Andrew Street. The reason there, it's in the CBD, but that's where the majority of Jews were living, around the CBD and Albert Park region. So they built the Andrew Street Shul in 1904, and it was just beautiful, interior and exterior. Then in 1923 you get the Park Street Shul, which is just close by, but you know how it is. 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and there was another synagogue built. And that was also very successful. Then what happened was everyone realized that there were these 2 synagogues full, that they even needed a bigger synagogue, and it was time to be united. So they formed the Durban United Hebrew Congregation, and the St. Andrew Street Shul was sold, and the Park Street Shul was eventually sold, and they built the big synagogue in Silverton Road. Now, that synagogue was so huge that it was called the Great Synagogue. And inside it had theatre seats, beautiful wooden theatre seats, which was enough to accommodate 600 men and 400 women. Now, I know growing up that there was so often, especially on the major Jewish holidays, there wasn't enough place. So their chairs were brought in, and there were chairs in the aisle to seat so many other people. I remember being a little person and having to sit on the stairs because there just wasn't enough room. Then the Orthodox Jewish community started to reduce inside, mainly because of immigration. So they took the decision in 2017 to decommission the Silverton Road Great Synagogue, and that was sold to a company. And now, today, they rent a much smaller space in a building that's also in Silverton Road. Now we also have another synagogue, which is the Durban Progressive Community, and that's very close by, on the top, on Ridge Road. And that was founded in 1951. And also a beautiful structure. Inside, the interiors are beautiful, but it's quite in the modernist style, quite austere outside. But I always remember from a child that the Durban progressive community always had the best garden. They had a beautiful garden. But again, they also saw a reduction in numbers, and that also was sold. And now they are at the Durban Jewish Club, and that synagogue is taken place of the old Freiheit Memorial Synagogue that was in the Durban Jewish Club. And a lot of the architectural elements of the Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark, and other little interesting architectural designs are also put inside that synagogue. Behind me you can see this magnificent Aron Kodesh and its parochet, which means the curtain that is hanging inside, that was brought from the Reform Shul that was in Ridge Road. And when it was decommissioned and replaced inside what was the Freiheit Memorial Shul at the Durban Jewish Club, it's beautiful that they brought this beautiful Aron Kodesh, parochet, and the menorahs on either side to be in the new shul. There's also those architectural details that are on the side of the Aron Kodesh. You see the tiny little 10 commandments that were brought from the old shul. They used to be above the ark, and that was where the choir was, and they've been used on the windows inside the new synagogue as well. The two large synagogues, the one for the Orthodox being the Great Synagogue in Silverton Road, and the other synagogue in Ridge Road, which was the Durban Progressive Hebrew Congregation synagogues, are rather large, so that when they were decommissioned and sold, it was a perfect opportunity for tertiary institutions to purchase them to house everybody. And it was a sad day for everybody when that happened. But I have to say, the whole Durban Jewish community is a very dynamic community. We always say that the Durban Jewish community punches above their weight, because you find that the majority of the Jewish community are involved in all different organizations attached to the synagogue and in the greater community. We are doers.
That brings us to the end of this week's episode of Simcha, a celebration of life. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so please send us a Facebook message at Spirit Sister Productions. From me, Jared Epstein, and the Simcha team, remember these words from the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. To be cured of potential violence towards the other, I must be able to imagine myself as the other.